So one day, while doing nothing particularly out of the ordinary, I had an idea. What if the Paper Mario TTYD partners were in Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64? Basically, how would all their moves stack up in the older game? Where there's no partner badges, partners can't use items, they don't have their own HP, you get the idea. A couple of ground rules: I'm going to be judging the partners according to where I think you'd get them in the game. For example, I would still say that Goombella and Koops are both the first partners you get in the game, but you would not be seeing Flurrie in Chapter 2. Instead, you'd be getting a partner that more closely matches the puzzles you need to solve in that chapter. I'm also going to have partner moves act as they would in TTYD, but function according to 64's battle engine. And that's about it, so let's get into it. Starting us off is Goombario's successor, Goombella. Now, Goombella functions extremely similarly to Goombario. Like Goombario, she can headbunk, tattle, and multi-bunk. However, Goombella actually gains multi-bunk earlier than Goombario would. Which sounds really good, but there's a problem with that. That problem being that in 64, Goombario learning Charge is the only way to boost the power of his multi-bunk once you actually get it. Because keep in mind, partners cannot be affected by statuses beyond being stunned, and that generally means that Goombella will not be able to hit very hard at all. It's not helped either by the fact that bosses tend to have very low power bounce caps, and so while there is obviously potential for Goombella to do above average damage, it would not be anything special. Goombella's offenses really are just straight up outclassed by future partners we'll be talking about in this video. That all being said, she still has Rally Wink, which is definitely her saving grace as a partner. And with how much more that Mario can do over his partners in Paper Mario 64, having effectively a second Mario was actually a really big deal. That being said, it's not hard to replicate that effect with using Bow and vanilla Paper Mario 64 using Out of Sight. And that move had only half of Goombella's FP cost. But the final nail in the coffin is that you don't even get Rally Wink until Chapter 5. Because only then do you have access to Ultra Rank partners. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Goombella would not be very good in Paper Mario 64. I could see Rally Wink being good against some later bosses like Hufflepuff or Bowser, but the later partners in this video simply have better options than her. A prime example being Koops. Now, for the most part, he isn't all that different from Kooper. There are some small stuff, like the fact that Koops' Power Shell actually does more damage at Ultra Rank than Kooper's, since Kooper has an attack power of 4 while Koops has an attack power of 5. But admittedly, that's pretty minor. As far as the difference between Kooper's Fire Shell and Koops' Shell Slams go, the way Paper Mario 64 is designed actually does favor Fire Shell a fair bit. Not by much, but at least a little. Since though enemies with higher defense do exist, Frost Piranhas and Wet Clubbas actually make the ability of Fire Shell to do fiery damage more practical. Still, Shell Slam would have its place against enemies like Koopa Trolls and Hammer Bros, and it's still as strong against the Crystal King. However, if Koops was in Paper Mario 64, indisputably, the bulk of Koops' usefulness would have to come from Shell Shield. This move in 64 would be so busted. With partners being more limited, and that means Mario is the only character who can use Mega Rush, allowing him to stay safe at only 1 HP so he can maximize damage would make him absolutely ridiculous. Formerly powerful badges like Last Stand and HP Drain would be simply outclassed. As for the cost of 0 BP, Koops could just drop a dome onto Mario, making him effectively impossible to actually kill. The bosses in this game are also generally more predictable with their AI, meaning even though you don't have items like Trials, Stew, or Point Swaps, it still should not be very difficult to get Mario to only 1 HP mid-fight, especially when the Shell Shield you drop doesn't have to be at max power either. It would all around be an absolutely game-breaking move. It would make Koops a very reliable partner to have on you for basically any boss fight after Chapter 1. So overall, Koops just clears Goombella. Absolutely no contest. Now when it comes to Bobbery, this is interesting, because his primary attack is actually the move that Bombette needs to use FP to be able to use. And with a starting damage of 4, yeah, it's pretty strong early game. However, I don't really think this would break the game balance in any meaningful way. Obviously for regular enemies, this is very much overpowered. However, with bosses, it really isn't. It would bust out the Koopa Bros pretty good, sure, but if we're being real, that fight has never really been difficult. Though being able to immediately topple over the tower would definitely be nice. However, after that, most bosses you'd encounter are actually elevated, so Bobbery can't reach them. I think what's actually interesting that Bobbery has on him is his Bomb Squad skill. In TTYD, every time you use Bomb Squad, you're able to throw 3 bombs that will explode 1 turn later, doing 3 damage per explosive. The low base power makes it ideal to use against targets without defense, which if you did do that, it easily does more damage than an attack like Bombette's Bomb, Sushi Squirt, or Parakarry's Shell Shot. Except also with the potential to hit multiple targets at once, which for only 3 FP is downright terrific. Definitely good for early game. This all being said, enemies of defense are not uncommon in 64 at all, and that includes bosses. And there's really no way to reduce enemy defense, which is unfortunate for Bobbery since none of his attacks can actually pierce. So later in the game, Bobbery would not be very good. And the moves that he gets from ranking up aren't really anything to write home about either. Bombast is powerful but expensive, and it's not really viable to use repeatedly. Meanwhile, for Holdfast, partners are generally not going to get targeted by enemy attacks, and whenever they are, it's literally never a direct attack. Except for like Kensei's Power Shell, but even then he's in his shell, and as a result, an explosion wouldn't really hurt him. So while I would say that he's better than Goombella, not really by very much. At the very least, he would definitely be more consistent than her. The next partner to talk about, I believe that to replace Parakarry in Chapter 2, it would have to be Yoshi. Yoshi's attacks, with the exception of Gulp, all hit several times, but in return, they don't do a lot of damage. Now, with all the ways to buff partner attacks in TTYD, this wasn't really a problem at all. There were plenty of ways to boost partner damage in that game. However, in 64, those options do not exist. Now, this isn't to say that Yoshi would be bad in Paper Mario 64. After all, his damage output isn't really any different from someone like, say, Lady Bo. However, unlike Lady Bo, Yoshi also doesn't really get a move that does more damage than 6 to a single enemy. Or at least Bo got Fan Smack, which against enemies of 0 defense was absolutely fantastic. So while Yoshi's damage potential is still good, it's really nothing special at all. However, also unlike Lady Bo, Yoshi has Mini Egg, an attack that hits enemies multiple times, with each egg having its own chances of inflicting the Shrink status ailment. For bosses that are vulnerable to the status ailment that have only one target in the fight, this move would actually be a fairly reliable way of getting the status off. And what's really cool about Shrink is that a shrunken target has her attack power be cut in half, meaning that for fights like Tabalubba's Heart, Yoshi would have a genuine niche defensively there. In fact, alongside Koops, these two could fill a very genuine defensive niche while also allowing Mario to reach peril reliably. Don't even get me started on the various master fights. As far as Gulp is concerned, it realistically would be one of the first piercing attacks you'd have access to, making it a very viable chomp killer in the game. And with how all spiky enemies are grounded in 64, it's a sign of Yoshi having good attack coverage. Meanwhile, as far as Stampede goes, it would essentially be as good as Parakarry's Air Raid, minus the fact that against enemies with defense, it would do absolutely nothing. Which, while on its own it isn't really that bad, another partner attack with the same range but basically identical power like say Vivian's Fiery Jinx would outclass it, but Stampede would be capable of more immediate damage. And also, if there were enemies that had high defense on the ground, that's what Gulp is for anyway. Overall, however, despite all the nerfs that Yoshi would suffer from, he would still be a decent partner in 64. If I was to estimate, I'd probably rank him slightly above Bobbery, but not by much. Just because though Bobbery is better at doing damage, Yoshi is better at helping Mario do more damage. And I just think that's a bigger deal. Moving on, what could be said about Vivian, who I believe would replace Lady Bo in Chapter 3? Well, to start off, what do we think about the fact that there's no burn status element in Paper Mario 64? Theoretically, burn is no different from poison as far as the effect, but it feels like kind of a messy situation, so tell me what you think in the comments down below. But for the purpose of this video, let's just say that Vivian's attacks don't actually have a status associated with them. Without the additional damage from burn, she's still as strong, if not stronger than Parakarry at lower ranks. Though funnily enough, missing the action command for her Shade Fist doesn't really do anything then, since in T2YD, missing the action command just means that she doesn't lend the burn status element. Though doing additional damage without having to attack while you're using a move like Veil would be fairly nice. Veil and TTYD, meanwhile, was a bad move. However, compared to 64's Out of Sight, it was a bad move for a very specific reason. TTYD allows a player to end the turn with a partner either in the front or in the back. So for example, if Mario already acted and you have Vivian use Veil with Mario in the front and she's in the back, then Mario's turn next turn will have already been used up because he was not able to act in that turn, while Vivian acting second would bring Mario back up, allowing the enemy to then act immediately afterwards. However, inversely, if Vivian is in front and she uses Veil first instead, then Mario will lose his turn to attack in that turn. However, Vivian while in front would bring Mario back up from the shadows, and Mario, having his turn not been used up yet, is able to act in that very same turn. That's how Veil worked in TTYD. However, how Out of Sight worked in 64 is that if Mario acts in that turn and then Bo uses Out of Sight, when Bo releases Mario from the move, Mario will be able to attack that very same turn, after the enemy side already got to act. I mean, it's true that if you use Out of Sight first, then yeah, it would work basically like Veil does in TTYD, but that's just it. You have absolutely no reason to ever use Out of Sight first, and Veil in 64 would work the exact same way, meaning that for 1 FP, Vivian's Veil would function as a pseudo rally wing. And that is busted. Bo already is the best partner bar none in 64 with her Out of Sight. But Vivian would have a very strong case for being considered the best partner in Paper Mario 64 if she existed in that game. It already more than makes up for the fact that Infatuate wouldn't really do anything for her, since there's no Confused status or equivalent in Paper Mario 64 anyway. And even if there was, the move sucks. I don't think anyone would really miss it. Even if Veil wouldn't function like that in 64, Vivian would still be a decent partner in battle. Her claim to fame would be Fiery Jinx, which despite lacking the ability to burn would cover most regular enemies. Sure, it wouldn't be as strong as Bombette's Mega Bomb or even Cooper's Fire Shell, but it also pierces defense, making it definitively stronger in Chapter 8, and even various bosses like the Crystal King and General Guy. Being someone who can wield fire also gives her an offensive advantage over other partners in Chapter 7, where several enemies that are weak to fire exist. So even without burn as a status element, Vivian would be an effective second attacker, especially since Fiery Jinx is available much earlier than the earlier mentioned AoE attacks, since she gets it at Super Rank, not Ultra. In reality, despite losing out on a status ailment, she actually benefits a lot from the 64 battle engine. My opinion? Put a ring on Vivian. She's a keeper. Though if you're not concerned with being at a high level, I do think that then Koops would win out, but at a lower level, I would say Vivian is better. And I do think that's more important. Now, the next partner I would say you would get may raise some eyebrows, but I do think it makes sense to get Miss Mowz in Chapter 4, since Watt's whole deal in 64 is helping you find secrets, and that's what Mowz does in TTYD. Now, as far as Mowz's moveset is concerned, Love Slap is sadly strictly worse than Electro Dash. It does less damage, and it has worse range. However, thinking practically, Miss Mowz would almost never be using that move anyway. Nor Kiss Thief, because there are no badges to steal in this game. Yes, some enemies can drop rare items like Amazing Daisies and Gem and Jelly, but Kiss Thief checks for what items can be held, not what items can be dropped. So short of stolen coins from a bandit, it doesn't really do anything for you. That all being said, Miss Mowz has one saving grace: tease. You see, Dizzy as a status ailment gives the enemy that's attacking you a 50% chance to just randomly miss. An effect that's just straight up unreliable, and it makes Tease the worst partner move in the entirety of TTYD. However, in 64, Dizzy as a status works differently. Instead of reducing the chance of the enemy actually hitting you, it makes it so that the enemy can't act at all. Yeah, it actually functions like the Paralyze, the Sleep, and the Stop statuses. The thing is, Cooper, a partner in 64, actually has a move that can cast this status in Dizzy Shell. However, Dizzy Shell can only hit enemies that are on the ground, and Miss Mowz's Tease can hit enemies that are in the air. And that's actually really fun to know, because enemies that can fly tend to be weaker to dizziness as a status ailment. So Mowz wouldn't be good for much, but Tease would actually be a fairly good move to have. If we're being generous though, I can see Smooch also being a decent move despite the fact that it costs 10 FP. But with enough creativity and game sense, you just never really need a move like this. And so all in all, despite having some really neat tools, even if only one, this Mowz in my opinion wouldn't really be much better than Goombella. Never thought I'd ever say that in my life, but here we are. That all being said, would Goombella be the worst partner in Paper Mario 64? Probably not, because we have Madame Flurrie. Now, Flurrie's skills in the overworld don't really match up with any 64 partner skills. However, as a wind spirit, I think Laquille Lester may be the closest partner in comparison. In any case, compared to other partners, her body slam would be very powerful, having 6 attack power at Ultra rank, meaning she'd actually be fairly unfazed by defense. Entirely unfazed if you rely on a lip lock, which actually pierces defense and does the same amount of damage. It would be a shame that the move doesn't really heal anyone for anything because partners don't have their own HP stats in 64, but all the same, she's doing reliable damage. And against the final forms of Bowser and Junior Troopa, no other partner can really hit as hard as Flurrie. Now admittedly, this is mostly just splitting hairs because the damage that she can do really isn't very high. And as this video has already long since demonstrated, it's actually a lot better for a partner to be able to help Mario do a lot of damage, rather than the partner themselves being able to do damage on their own. And going by that logic, yeah, Flurrie is actually pretty awful. The only move that she really has that stands out is Gale Force, which can be cute for getting star points from regular enemies quickly, but it's hardly practical. It's not like 64 has an equivalent to the Pit of 100 Trials from TTYD after all. Meanwhile, there's also Dodgy Fog, and though there isn't a dodgy status in this game, it's really no different from Laquille Lester's Cloud 9, and even with that move in mind, why settle for only a chance to avoid an enemy attack when Koops is literally right there with Shell Shield? There's just no practical advantages that Flurrie has over any other partner, not even Goombella, who at least has Riley Wink. And so overall, if all the TTYD partners were in 64, I feel confident in saying that Flurrie would be the worst of them all. Maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. But whether or not you do, I want to thank you for watching this video. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe down below. And thank you to my channel members, Nintendo Sixty-Jorts and MB Switchy. I really appreciate your donations. And that's all I got. I'll see you later.